Hit the like button, share your thoughts, subscribe, and tap the bell icon. The bustling space station of Callista Prime was a hub for interstellar travelers. Merchants hawked exotic wares, neon lights flickered against the cold steel walls, and the scent of alien spices mixed with industrial oil filled the air. Among the crowd, Ethan played his guitar, his haunting melody cutting through the chaos. His music wasn't flashy or polished, but it carried raw emotion. Passers-by dropped a few credits into his open case, yet most walked by indifferent. For Ethan, this was survival, scraping by in the void of space, far from Earth, chasing a dream that felt increasingly out of reach. From the shadows of the crowd emerged Lyra. Her iridescent skin shimmered faintly under the station's lights, and her translucent robes billowed as if caught in an invisible breeze. Her wide, luminous eyes locked onto Ethan. She seemed otherworldly, even for Callista Prime, where beings of every shape and size intermingled. Lyra wasn't here by chance. She had heard the rumors, whispers of a human whose music could stir emotions like no other. Intrigued, she ventured into the crowded bazaar, hoping to understand this peculiar art form. Ethan's fingers danced over the strings, weaving a melody that spoke of longing and resilience. To Lyra, the sound was unlike anything she had ever encountered. Her people, the Orcs, communicated through telepathic images and concepts, but music, raw, imperfect, and deeply personal, was foreign and strangely captivating. When Ethan finished his song, Lyra hesitated before stepping closer. "Your music. It stirs something I cannot name," she said, her voice lilting and musical in itself. Ethan looked up, startled. He was used to polite nods or vague compliments, not such an intense reaction. Thanks," he said awkwardly, studying her. He couldn't place her species, but she had an air of grace and intelligence. "What do you call this expression?" Lyra asked, her head tilting slightly. "It's just music," Ethan replied, a hint of confusion in his tone. "Haven't you heard it before?" Lyra shook her head. "Not like this. My people do not create sound for emotion. We communicate through thought." Ethan blinked. "That sounds efficient, but kind of dull." Lyra's lips curved into what might have been a smile. "Perhaps, but your music feels alive, as though it has a soul." For the first time in years, Ethan felt a flicker of pride. Most people dismissed his music as a relic of Earth's past, a quaint novelty in the age of interstellar advancement. But here was someone genuinely moved by it. They talked as the crowd ebbed and flowed around them. Ethan explained how music had been a part of human culture for millennia, a way to express love, sorrow, and everything in between. Lyra listened intently, her luminous eyes never leaving his face. When Ethan offered to play her another song, Lyra hesitated. "I should not linger. My presence here is complicated." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Complicated how?" "It is forbidden for Orcs to engage with such visceral experiences," Lyra admitted. "Our society values order and clarity. Emotion is seen as a weakness." Ethan smirked. "Sounds like they'd hate humans." Then, Lyra's gaze softened. "Perhaps, but I cannot deny the beauty in your art." As she turned to leave, Ethan impulsively said, "Wait, will I see you again?" Lyra hesitated, a conflict flashing across her features. "Perhaps," she said before disappearing into the crowd. Ethan sat there, his guitar resting on his lap, his mind spinning. He didn't know who Lyra was or why she was so affected by his music, but something about her struck a chord deep within him. For the first time in a long while, he felt like his music had purpose beyond survival. And he wasn't about to let that go. The following day, Ethan found himself scanning the crowd at Callista Prime's bazaar with a heightened sense of anticipation. He had spent the night replaying his conversation with Lyra, her ethereal presence lingering in his thoughts. He didn't know what he'd say if he saw her again, but a small, stubborn part of him hoped he would. His guitar case lay open as usual, a modest scattering of credits already collected. Ethan strummed a few chords absently, crafting a melody that was both haunting and hopeful. The notes carried through the air, drawing curious glances from the crowd. Yet, his gaze darted to every corner, searching for a shimmer of iridescent skin. Then he saw her. Lyra stood on the edge of the bustling square, partially obscured by a group of traders. She hesitated, as though wrestling with an invisible force. When their eyes met, she took a deliberate step forward, and then another until she stood before him. "You came back," Ethan said, unable to hide his surprise. "I could not stay away," Lyra admitted. "Your music is unlike anything I have encountered. It lingers in my mind, even when I try to silence it." Ethan grinned. "That's the idea." She glanced around, her expression cautious. "My presence here is dangerous. My people would not approve of this interaction." "Why?" Ethan asked, genuinely curious. "What's so dangerous about music?" Lyra hesitated before sitting gracefully on a nearby bench. "The Orcs value precision and logic above all else. Emotions disrupt clarity. Music, with its raw expression, threatens the balance we hold sacred." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "That sounds suffocating." "It is not without merit," she countered. "Our society thrives because we eliminate discord." "But," she added softly, "I now wonder what we might have lost in exchange." Ethan considered her words before plucking a few strings, crafting a simple, soulful tune. "Well, since you're here, why not make the most of it? This one's for you." Lyra tilted her head, her luminous eyes narrowing in curiosity as the melody unfolded. Ethan sang softly, his voice carrying a mix of tenderness and longing. The words were improvised, a story of a wanderer who found beauty in the unlikeliest of places. As the song ended, Lyra sat in silence, her gaze distant. "I felt something," she murmured. "It is as if the melody unlocked a door within me. A door I did not know existed." "That's the magic of music," Ethan said with a small smile. "It can say the things we're too afraid to say out loud." Lyra looked at him, her expression unreadable. "If my people could experience this, perhaps they would understand. Perhaps they would change." The weight of her words wasn't lost on Ethan. "Is that what you want? For your people to change?" "I do not know," she admitted. "But I know that I cannot forget what I have felt here." Before Ethan could respond, a sudden commotion broke out nearby. A group of armored figures, unmistakably Orcs enforcers, entered the square. Their elegant, flowing uniforms were a stark contrast to the weapons they carried, but their presence radiated authority. Lyra stiffened. "They are here for me." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "What? Why?" "I told you, my presence here is forbidden," Lyra said, rising to her feet. "If they see me with you, they will consider it an act of rebellion." Ethan's mind raced. "Then let's get out of here." "No," Lyra said firmly. "Running will only confirm their suspicions. I must face them." Before Ethan could protest, Lyra stepped into the open. The enforcers spotted her immediately, their movements synchronized as they approached. "Lyra," the leader said, his tone cold and commanding. "You have been absent from the assembly for days. Explain yourself." Lyra stood tall, her voice steady. "I sought understanding beyond the confines of our protocols." "Is that a crime?" The enforcer's gaze flickered to Ethan, still holding his guitar. "This human, he is the source of your distraction." Ethan bristled but remained silent, sensing it wasn't his place to intervene. Lyra, however, didn't flinch. "He is a musician," she said, her tone defiant. "His art has shown me a perspective we have long ignored. I wish to understand it." The leader's expression darkened. "You risk destabilizing our order for the sake of primitive noise?" "It is not noise," Lyra shot back, her voice rising. "It is expression, emotion, something we have suppressed for far too long." Ethan watched, a mix of awe and concern swelling within him. Lyra's courage was undeniable, but the enforcer's growing hostility was palpable. "This ends now," the leader declared, gesturing for Lyra to follow. "You will return to the assembly for evaluation. As for the human—" "He is under my protection," Lyra interrupted. "Harm him, and I will ensure the council hears of it." The enforcers hesitated, clearly caught off guard by her boldness. After a tense moment, the leader relented. Very well. But know this, Lyra. You tread on dangerous ground. As they led her away, Lyra glanced back at Ethan. Her expression was unreadable, but her luminous eyes held a message he couldn't ignore. This wasn't over. Ethan tightened his grip on his guitar. Whatever trouble Lyra was in, he wasn't about to let her face it alone. Ethan sat alone in the corner of a dimly lit bar on Callista Prime, his guitar resting against the wall beside him. The encounter with the Orcs enforcers haunted him. Lyra's bravery had been breathtaking, but her parting words lingered like a melody stuck on repeat. This isn't over. He strummed a few idle chords, but the sound lacked his usual energy. He wasn't sure why he cared so much about Lyra. Maybe it was her sincerity, her curiosity, or the way she saw his music for what it was, raw and honest, stripped of pretense. Whatever it was, he couldn't let her go without a fight. A shadow passed over his table. Ethan glanced up to find a hooded figure standing there. The cloak shimmered faintly, revealing Orcs craftsmanship. His pulse quickened. Ethan, a soft, familiar voice said. Lyra pulled back the hood, her luminous eyes scanning the room. May I sit? He nodded, relief flooding through him. You're okay. I thought. They released me after questioning, she interrupted, her voice quieter than before. But I should not be here. If they discover this meeting, the consequences will be severe. Ethan leaned forward, his hands resting on the table. Then why did you come? Lyra hesitated, her gaze flickering to his guitar. Because I cannot silence what your music awakened within me. I needed to see you again. Her words struck a chord in Ethan's chest. Lyra, what's really going on? Why does your society fear music so much? Lyra glanced around, ensuring no one was listening, before answering. Centuries ago, my people were not so different from yours. We sang, danced, and expressed emotion freely. But during a great conflict, our leaders concluded that emotion was the root of chaos. They purged it from our culture, adopting telepathic communication to ensure clarity and control. Ethan frowned. That sounds extreme. It was, she admitted. But it worked. We achieved harmony at the cost of passion. And now, any act that stirs deep emotion, like your music, is considered a threat to our stability. Ethan shook his head. That's insane. You can't just erase feelings and call it peace. Lyra smiled faintly. Perhaps. But those who challenge the order are cast out or worse. Ethan's fingers drummed against the table as a plan formed in his mind. What if we didn't just challenge it? What if we broke it? Lyra's eyes widened. What are you suggesting? I'm saying we use music, our music, to show your people what they're missing, Ethan said. If they hear it, really hear it, maybe they'll start to question things too. Lyra leaned back, the idea clearly unsettling her. You don't understand. They won't just silence us. They'll destroy us. And anyone who hears the music will be considered tainted. Ethan's jaw tightened. Then what's the alternative? You just go back to pretending you don't feel anything? You said it yourself. You can't unhear what you felt. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Lyra's gaze dropped to the table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Finally, she spoke. If we do this, it must be carefully planned. The Orcs Council will not tolerate open defiance. Ethan nodded. We'll need to be smart. But I know a few places on this station where we can play without being found. Lyra looked at him, a mixture of fear and resolve in her eyes. Then we must create something powerful. A melody that cannot be ignored. Ethan grinned. Now you're speaking my language. The next week was a whirlwind. Lyra visited Ethan's cramped quarters in secret, her iridescent robes traded for a nondescript cloak. Together, they worked tirelessly, crafting a piece of music that blended human emotion with Orcs precision. Lyra's telepathic abilities allowed her to suggest harmonies and rhythms Ethan would never have conceived, while Ethan's raw passion infused the composition with soul. One night, as they rehearsed, Ethan noticed Lyra humming softly along with the melody. The sound was fragile, tentative, and achingly beautiful. You've got a voice, Ethan said, smiling. Why don't you sing more? Lyra looked away, her expression unreadable. Ornari do not sing. It is forbidden. Well, Ethan said, strumming a few playful chords, you've already broken a bunch of rules. What's one more? For the first time since they'd met, Lyra laughed. It was a soft, musical sound, and it made Ethan's chest tighten. Perhaps you are a bad influence on me, she said. Maybe, Ethan replied. But I think you needed it. The night of their first performance, Ethan's nerves were on edge. They had chosen an abandoned section of the station's underbelly, a labyrinth of dimly lit corridors and forgotten rooms. Word had spread quietly, and a small crowd of humans, aliens, and even a few curious Ornari had gathered. Ethan glanced at Lyra, who stood beside him, her luminous skin glowing faintly in the dim light. Ready? He asked. She nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. Let us begin. Ethan started with a slow, simple melody, the gentle strumming of his guitar filling the space. Lyra closed her eyes, her voice rising in harmony with the music. The sound was otherworldly, haunting and ethereal, yet deeply emotional. As the song swelled, Ethan saw the audience's reactions. Awe, wonder, even tears. For many, it was their first experience of Ornari expression, and it was transformative. But among the enraptured faces, Ethan spotted movement. A shadow in the corner. His heart sank as he recognized the uniform of an Ornari enforcer. The melody lingered in the air as the crowd, captivated by the performance, failed to notice the looming presence of the Ornari enforcer. Ethan's fingers froze on the strings, and Lyra's voice faltered when she saw him. The enforcer stepped forward, his sharp, glowing eyes scanning the crowd before locking onto Lyra. Lyra, the enforcer's voice rang out, cold and unyielding, cutting through the stillness like a blade. You are in direct violation of the Harmony Edict. Step away from the human and cease this disturbance immediately. The crowd, now aware of the danger, murmured in fear and confusion. A few began to slip away, but others held their ground, drawn by the raw beauty of what they had just experienced. Lyra's luminous eyes narrowed, and for the first time, Ethan saw a steely defiance in her usually serene demeanor. I am not causing disturbance, she said, her voice steady. I am creating connection. You are spreading chaos, the enforcer spat, his hand drifting toward the sleek weapon holstered at his side. This ends now. Ethan, gripping his guitar tightly, stepped forward. His voice was firm, though his heart pounded in his chest. She's not spreading chaos. She's showing you what you've been missing. Look at them, he said, gesturing to the crowd. They're not rioting. They're feeling. Isn't that worth something? The enforcer's gaze flicked to Ethan, his expression unreadable. Human, you do not understand the fragility of our order. Emotions like these are dangerous. Dangerous, Ethan shot back. Or powerful? The enforcer took a menacing step forward, but Lyra raised her hand, her posture commanding. Enough, she said. If you wish to detain me, then do so. But you will not harm him. The enforcer hesitated, clearly unprepared for her defiance. You are a member of the Ornari Council, he said, his voice low. Do not throw your position away for this indulgence. Lyra straightened, her iridescent skin shimmering faintly in the dim light. I was raised to uphold harmony, she said. But I see now that harmony without emotion is hollow. If that is treason, then so be it. The enforcer's hand tightened on his weapon, but before he could act, a voice called out from the crowd. She's right. All eyes turned to a middle-aged human woman near the front. She stepped forward, her face resolute. I've lived on this station for years, surrounded by rules and silence. Tonight's the first time I felt alive. Another voice chimed in, this one belonging to an alien with mottled green skin. Her song, it brought me peace, something my people have chased for centuries. One by one, the crowd began to voice their support, their words a patchwork of languages and accents. The enforcer, visibly rattled, glanced around, his confidence waning. This is a breach of the edict, he said, his voice less certain. You are all complicit. Ethan saw his chance. Turning to the crowd, he raised his voice. If this is what the Orcs call chaos, then maybe it's time for some. Because this, he gestured to Lyra and the guitar slung over his shoulder. This isn't destruction, it's creation, and it's worth fighting for. The enforcer's jaw clenched as he activated a device on his wrist, sending a signal back to his superiors. Reinforcements are coming, he warned. You cannot stand against the council. Lyra stepped closer to Ethan, her voice low but resolute. We need to leave. Now. Ethan nodded, his mind racing. Back exit, he asked, glancing at a burly alien who had been helping organize the gathering. The alien nodded. This way, he rumbled, gesturing toward a dimly lit corridor. Ethan grabbed his guitar and followed Lyra as the crowd began to disperse, some slipping away to avoid the coming storm while others stood their ground, forming an impromptu wall to buy them time. As they hurried through the labyrinth of corridors, Lyra's pace slowed. They will not stop, Ethan, she said, her voice heavy with regret. The council will see this as an existential threat. Ethan paused, turning to face her. So what? Are we supposed to just give up? Pretend this never happened? No, Lyra said firmly. But we must be strategic. A single performance will not change centuries of suppression. We need more. More performances? Ethan asked. More voices, Lyra clarified. Your music is a catalyst, but we need others to carry it forward. If this is to succeed, it cannot be just us. Ethan frowned, the weight of her words sinking in. You're talking about starting a movement. Lyra nodded. If we can ignite even a fraction of the Orcs with this feeling, it will spread. The council cannot silence an entire galaxy. For a moment, Ethan felt the enormity of what they were up against. A single musician and a rebellious alien against an interstellar regime. But then he thought of the faces in the crowd, the hope in their eyes. All right, he said, his voice steady. Let's do it. By the time they reached Ethan's quarters, they had begun sketching out their next steps. Lyra would use her connections within the Orcs Council to secretly spread their message, while Ethan reached out to other musicians and performers on Callista Prime and beyond. The fight ahead would be long and dangerous, but neither of them felt afraid. For the first time in their lives, they were creating something bigger than themselves. But as they plotted their rebellion, a shadow loomed outside Ethan's door, a silent figure with a communicator in hand, reporting their every word to an unseen master. Ethan woke to the sharp buzz of his comlink, its persistent tone cutting through the haze of his sleep. His heart skipped when he glanced at the time. It was well past midnight, but the call was urgent. Ethan, you need to wake up. Lyra's voice crackled through the speaker. They're coming. The enforcers. They know what we're planning. A chill ran through him. He jumped out of bed, throwing on his jacket and grabbing his guitar case. The rebellion they'd started was no longer a quiet movement of artists and idealists. It was a war, and Lyra was right. The Orcs would not let it go unchallenged. Where are we going? He asked, trying to steady his breath. There's a hidden path beneath the station. Lyra's voice was calm but edged with urgency. It leads to the outer rim. We can disappear for a while, regroup, find others who are willing to help. Ethan nodded, knowing it was their only option. There was no time to waste. His mind raced as he loaded a few essentials into his pack. Water, food, a few extra strings for his guitar, and headed for the exit. When he stepped into the narrow alley behind his apartment, the night air hit him like a slap. The distant hum of the station's engines was interrupted by the faint sound of footsteps approaching. Lyra appeared from the shadows, her usual radiant glow dimmed by the low lighting of the alley. She motioned for him to follow as she led the way through a series of back corridors. They're after us, she said, her voice tight with restrained fear. The council won't tolerate any more defiance. They'll stop us if they have to. Ethan could feel the weight of her words settling in. He'd known the stakes were high, but hearing the fear in Lyra's voice made it all too real. This was no longer just about music. It was about survival. We'll make it, Ethan said, trying to reassure her, though even he wasn't certain. We just need to stick to the plan and move fast. They reached an old maintenance hatch, half hidden beneath a pile of debris. Lyra entered the code to unlock it, and the hatch groaned open with a hiss. They ducked inside, making their way down a steep, winding tunnel that led deep beneath the station. The path was narrow, claustrophobic, but it was their only escape route. As they moved, the sound of blaster fire echoed from above, distant but unmistakable. The Orcs were already sweeping the station for them. "They're closing in," Lyra muttered, picking up the pace. "I've sent messages to a few others who are sympathetic to our cause. If we can make it to the rim, we can start organizing." Ethan gritted his teeth. "We're not running forever. We're going to fight." Lyra glanced at him sharply. "You don't understand. The Orcs are not like any enemy you've faced. They have power, authority over an entire system. If we resist too much, they'll crush us without hesitation." "Maybe," Ethan said, his voice hardening. "But maybe they're not the only ones with power." She paused, her eyes searching his face. "What do you mean?" Ethan's mind flashed back to the crowd they'd performed for, the people who had stood up for Lyra, who had felt the power of the music. "We've got the people," he said. "We've already shown them something they can't ignore. They're with us." Lyra looked uncertain, but then she nodded slowly. "Perhaps. But we still need a way to counter the Orcs' reach." They reached a hidden transport station after a long trek through the maintenance tunnels, the dim lights flickering overhead. Lyra activated the system, and the hum of a hidden transit shuttle powered up. "I've arranged for passage," Lyra said, her fingers moving with practiced speed over the controls. "This shuttle will take us to a base on the rim. There, we'll meet the others who've agreed to join our cause." As the shuttle's engines roared to life, Ethan took one last look at the station above them. The city's towering structures, once symbols of progress and hope, now felt like a cage. He knew the Orcs wouldn't let them go easily, but he also knew they couldn't stay hidden forever. "I don't want to run anymore, Lyra," Ethan said, the resolve in his voice as strong as steel. "We need to fight back." Lyra met his gaze, her face unreadable. "And we will. But we must be smart about it. Our rebellion is fragile. It must grow." The shuttle shot out into the expanse of space, leaving Callista Prime behind. As they moved further into the galaxy, Ethan's mind turned to the next steps. They had to find allies. Musicians, artists, anyone who could help them spread the message, amplify the sound. But the Orcs were relentless, and their reach was vast. A flicker of unease danced through his mind as he realized that the risks they were taking were greater than he had ever imagined. The journey ahead was uncertain. There would be no turning back, no safe harbor. They were all in, and the stakes had never been higher. Hours later, as the shuttle coasted through the darkened space between systems, Lyra and Ethan sat in silence. It wasn't the calm of peace, but the quiet before the storm. Lyra's gaze was distant, her expression hard to read. Ethan began, breaking the silence. "This whole thing started with a song. A simple melody." Lyra turned to face him, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Music is powerful," she said, her voice soft but filled with conviction. "More powerful than you know. But it is not enough on its own. We must make them hear it, Ethan. We must make them understand." Ethan nodded, his hand resting on his guitar. "Then let's make them listen." The shuttle continued its journey toward the outer rim. As the stars streaked past, Ethan felt the weight of their mission pressing on his chest. The music had brought them this far, but it would take more than just melody to win this fight. It would take courage. It would take unity. And it would take everything they had. They were no longer just two rebels hiding in the shadows. They were the spark that could ignite a revolution. The stars outside the shuttle window blurred into streaks of light as they accelerated toward the outer rim. Lyra sat beside Ethan, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the console. The air between them was thick with anticipation and fear. The journey ahead was uncharted, and the stakes were higher than ever. They weren't just fleeing anymore. They were preparing to lead a rebellion. Ethan had never been one for big causes, never cared much for politics or the systems that controlled the universe. But now, with Lyra at his side, everything had changed. They were more than just fugitives. They were symbols, the embodiment of a movement that could reshape an entire species. Lyra, Ethan said, breaking the silence that had settled between them, we need to get the message out there. I've got a lot of contacts, musicians who might be able to help. Lyra nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on the stars ahead. We will need more than musicians. We need allies who can fight, who can help us build a network. I know, Ethan replied, but music can reach people in ways words can't. It's not just about rebellion. It's about awakening something within them, showing them what they're missing. If we can spread the message far enough, the Orcs won't be able to stop us. Lyra's gaze softened, but there was still a hard edge to her voice. The Orcs control more than just music. They control communication, information, transportation. They have the means to crush us. We must be careful. Ethan understood, but he also knew that the longer they hid, the harder it would be to inspire change. We don't have time for careful, he said, his voice firm. The longer we wait, the more people they'll silence. The more they'll make us afraid to stand up. Lyra studied him for a moment before she spoke again. You are right, but we cannot afford to fail. The tension in the shuttle's small cabin was palpable, and Ethan could feel the weight of their mission pressing on him. Lyra was the key to unlocking the Orcs' rigid system, and he couldn't afford to let her down. But in order to truly succeed, they needed more than just courage, they needed a plan. The shuttle finally broke through the final layer of atmosphere, and the distant outline of a station came into view. It was a hub on the outer rim, a place where those who defied the Orcs could find refuge. The station was a mishmash of old spacefaring ships and scavenged tech, all haphazardly pieced together to form a safe haven for outcasts and rebels. The docking bay was busy with activity as they landed, greeted by a group of individuals, mostly humans but a few aliens among them, who looked as though they had been expecting them. Lyra and Ethan exchanged a glance before stepping out into the hustle and bustle. Welcome to the Rim, a man with graying hair said, extending his hand. Name's Tolan. We've been keeping an eye out for you. Ethan shook his hand, but there was something uneasy in the way the man looked at Lyra. He could see it: fear, distrust, maybe even jealousy. Lyra was a powerful figure now, a symbol of the rebellion, but she was also a representative of everything that the Orcs had tried to suppress. And there were people here who had suffered because of that. I take it you've heard the news? Lyra said, her voice steady despite the tension. Tolan nodded grimly. The Orcs have launched a full sweep. They've already eliminated a few of our allies who tried to spread your message. Ethan's heart sank, but he didn't let it show. How bad is it? Bad, Tolan said. We're scattered. The Orcs are hunting us down, and they've started cutting off all the supply routes to the Rim. We can't even get basic supplies. Lyra clenched her fists. Then we'll find a way. We can't let them win. Ethan could see the determination in her eyes, the same fire he had seen when she first defied the Orcs in that underground performance. But this time, the stakes were much higher. They weren't just fighting for music, they were fighting for their survival. Over the next few days, they worked tirelessly to organize. Ethan contacted every musician, artist, and performer he could find. Word of their movement spread quickly, but so did the Orcs' countermeasures. Messages were intercepted, communication lines jammed. The Orcs were using everything in their power to quash any hope of resistance. Lyra and Ethan spent long hours in strategy meetings with Tolan and the others, trying to devise a plan. They couldn't just strike blindly. They needed to be methodical, find a way to cripple the Orcs' control. We have to hit them where it hurts, Lyra said one evening, pacing in front of the map of the station. Their communications are their most vulnerable point. If we can disrupt their transmissions, we can delay their ability to coordinate and deploy. And how do we do that? Ethan asked. We don't exactly have an army, Tolan chimed in. We don't need an army. We need a signal, something that can broadcast far enough to reach every corner of their network. We hit them with an overwhelming message. A rallying cry. Ethan's eyes lit up. A song. We could use a signal to broadcast a live performance. A signal from here to every Orcs-controlled station in the galaxy. Lyra's gaze flickered over to him. A performance? You think that would work? It has to, Ethan said. We hit them with something they can't ignore. A song of defiance that will awaken anyone who's ready to fight. We'll show them that they can't control what we feel. Lyra smiled, a hint of admiration in her expression. You've got the right idea. Music has always been the key. It's a language they can't silence. Not completely. The next few days were a blur of preparation. They set up makeshift stages in hidden corners of the rim, using scavenged equipment to transmit the broadcast. They brought in musicians from all corners of the galaxy, each one contributing their unique style to the message. Lyra's voice would be the centerpiece, the powerful, defiant sound that would shake the foundations of the Orrinari's oppressive regime. As they tested the equipment, Ethan felt a surge of purpose. This was it. This was their moment to strike back. And as the day of the performance drew nearer, Ethan realized something profound. It wasn't just about the music. It was about the people who believed in it. The people who were willing to stand together, to fight for what they knew was right. The day of the broadcast arrived. The station was buzzing with an energy that was both exhilarating and tense. In every corner, rebels, musicians, and strategists worked in tandem to ensure the performance would be flawless. Word had spread across the rim. This wasn't just a performance. This was a call to arms. Ethan stood in the makeshift control room, watching as the last of the technical setup was completed. The room hummed with the sound of equipment coming online, the flickering lights casting shadows on the faces of the rebels who were stationed around him. It was clear they were ready, but there was no hiding the anxiety in their eyes. This wasn't just about breaking Orrinari control, it was about igniting something that couldn't be put out. Lyra walked in, her presence like a breath of fresh air amidst the chaos. She was dressed simply, yet radiated an aura of calm resolve. Ethan couldn't help but feel a surge of admiration as she approached him, her eyes locking with his. "It's time," she said softly, her voice carrying a sense of finality. Ethan nodded. His hands gripped the guitar case by his side. He had played for years, but this would be unlike anything he'd ever done. This wasn't just music, it was rebellion. The broadcast signal was ready, and the entire rim was about to hear it. A signal that would reach the farthest corners of Orrinari-controlled space, cutting through their communications network like a blade through silk. They had one shot, one chance to strike at the heart of the Orrinari's hold over the galaxy. They had chosen the song carefully. It wasn't a simple tune. It was a melody that Lyra had written herself, inspired by the music of the human rebellion. It was a song of defiance, of breaking free from oppression, and of the unyielding spirit of those who had suffered under the Orrinari's rule. As Lyra stood on the stage, surrounded by the ragtag group of musicians, the room fell silent. The rebels in the audience held their breath, as if afraid to disturb the weight of what was about to unfold. Ethan took his place beside Lyra, the guitar in his hands feeling heavier than it ever had before. Lyra stepped forward to the microphone, her eyes scanning the crowd. The energy in the room was palpable, as if the very air hummed with the anticipation of what was about to happen. She lifted her hand, and the room fell into complete stillness. With a deep breath, she began to sing. The first notes of the song rang out, her voice piercing the silence with a clarity that cut straight to the heart. Ethan strummed his guitar in time with the rhythm, and the sound flowed into the air like a wave, sweeping over the audience. It was a blend of ancient and modern, human and alien, a sound that transcended boundaries and spoke directly to the soul. As the song built in intensity, the transmission system activated. The signal spread out from the rim, broadcasting the performance across the galaxy. It was more than just sound. It was a message, one that could not be ignored. It was a challenge to the Orrinari, an invitation to those who had suffered in silence for far too long. Outside the station, the vast expanse of space became a canvas for their defiance. The signal rippled through the stars, reaching planets and stations far beyond the rim. In every corner of the galaxy, rebels, outcasts, and those longing for freedom paused to listen. They heard the message. They felt it. Back in the control room, the team worked furiously, monitoring the broadcast. Tolan, standing beside Ethan, looked up at the large screen showing the transmission map. "It's reaching everywhere," he muttered, his voice full of awe. "We've done it. The Orcs won't be able to stop this." But just as the final crescendo of the song reached its peak, the screen flickered. A sharp alarm blared, and a red warning light flashed across the room. "They're jamming the signal," Tolan said, his face pale. "The Orcs are trying to block us." Ethan's heart raced. He had known it wouldn't be easy. The Orcs would never let this go unchecked. "Can we stop them?" he asked, his voice tense. Tolan's fingers flew across the console. "We've got backup systems, but it's going to take time to bypass the jamming. We can't let them interrupt the signal." Lyra's voice rang out from the stage. "Keep playing," she urged. "We can't stop now." Ethan's gaze shot to the stage. Lyra was standing tall, her voice unwavering as she continued to sing, undeterred by the interference. Her confidence was contagious, and the entire room followed suit. The music played on, louder and more determined, refusing to yield to the jamming signal. As the transmission reached its peak, a crackling noise filled the room, followed by a moment of silence. Ethan's fingers hovered over his guitar strings. He looked to Tolan, who was frantically working at the console. Then the screen flickered back to life, the signal stabilizing. "We did it," Tolan whispered in disbelief. "The broadcast is back online." The song surged forward again, undeterred. Across the galaxy, the broadcast continued to spread louder, stronger. It wasn't just music anymore. It was the anthem of a revolution. And then, as the last note of the song echoed into the stillness, there was a moment of complete silence. The tension hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. Ethan and Lyra exchanged a glance, their eyes locked. They both knew that this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The Orcs would retaliate, and they would come with everything they had. But for the first time, Ethan felt a glimmer of hope. They had planted the seed, and no matter what the Orcs did, that seed would grow. As the room erupted into cheers, Lyra stepped down from the stage and walked toward Ethan. The rebels around them were jubilant, but there was still a weight to the air. The real fight was still ahead. "We've done it," Ethan said, his voice filled with awe. "We've really done it." Lyra nodded, her eyes filled with a quiet determination. "Yes, but the battle has just begun." Outside, the galaxy was alive with the sound of revolution. The end. Thanks for watching, everyone. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stellar HFY content. Ring that bell to stay updated, and we'll see you next time.